So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14 this morning. If you want to go there and stick your thumb in it, Matthew chapter 14. Some of you may know this about me. Probably most of you don't necessarily. I have for a number of years now kind of had a rule that I just don't do hands-on work with elementary age kids. I know you laugh like you know this. I know my capability. I know where my line is, and elementary school age kids are just a little bit beyond that line. Do you want to know why I don't work with elementary age school kids? Everybody said yes. When I was in college at Summit over in Gering, they have a program, and they still do. It's called Mentored Ministry. It's a program where every student is required to be active in ministry in some way under mentorship, under a mentor. And so I went into college and as a freshman and was looking around at what I could do for mentored ministry. And the children's minister at the church that I grew up in came up to me. His name's Joe. And he said, "Hey, Matt, I want you to come and teach on Wednesday night during the midweek." And I foolishly, without asking any more questions, said, "Okay." And then I said, "What will I be teaching?" Or rather, who I will be teaching is more appropriate. And he said, "I want you to teach 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys. And there will be about 15 of them." Yes, that is an accurate response. And I said, "Okay." And over the next several months, I struggled at best with about 12 to 15 every week or so for 2 hours, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys. We're going to come back to that, but let's go here. Never mind. For all of us, as we follow Jesus in our lives, as we are pursuing Jesus and we have this, we say relationship with Jesus, there's this element where we are challenged in our walk with Jesus as we follow him. There's this element where Jesus really desires to push us to do things that we would not normally do. And we can call it a lot of different things, but I believe at the root of it, at the foundation, this is really a faith issue for us. This is all about our faith. God is pushing us outside of our comfort zones. And in order to step outside of our comfort zones, we have to have faith. We have to trust that he is going to be there with us. Our faith is being stretched at these times. And I think that this stretching, this faith stretching, this challenge that takes place in our lives, I think this is very important to God. We talk about this relationship that we have with God, and I think when we are stretched, when we allow God to stretch us or push us out of our comfort zone, really he's just trying to grow our relationship with him. And really the effect is we have a deeper intimacy with God. We grow closer to him, our faith is stretched, and our intimacy with God is becoming deeper. And so as we step out into areas that we would not normally step out into, our faith is being stretched, and we have to focus really on God more in those times. And some of you have really experienced this in your lives. God has called you to do things in your life that you were not necessarily comfortable doing right at first. Or maybe you didn't ask all the right questions ahead of time and you got into it and you realized, oh my goodness, I am in over my head because you agreed to teach 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys and you're overwhelmed by this. But some of you know exactly what this is. I want to talk about this faith stretching in light of our personal ministry. Each one of us, as we follow Jesus, we're really challenged to step out and to serve the community, to serve people around us. And this is our personal ministry to people around us. And so I want to talk about this in light of our personal ministry. And I would imagine that if we were to go up to somebody and we were to ask them, hey, what's your faith story? What's your story in following Jesus? I would imagine that you would get to a spot in that conversation where they would say, at some point as I was following Jesus, I felt this nudging, or I felt this conviction or this challenge to go do something. I saw this hole, or I saw this need. I saw this opportunity that nobody was filling, and I really just felt God pushing me there. And then I would imagine at some point they would probably say, but I felt very ill-equipped. I felt very unqualified. I was fearful, maybe. I didn't feel like I would have all the right answers, or whatever it may be. There's this hesitation in their lives where they're just not sure how this is going to work out. But then I would imagine most people then say, but I trusted God in that. Because he was convicting me, he was challenging me, he was pushing me to step out. And so I stepped out and I trusted God, and God did amazing things. I bet you would have that conversation with a lot of different people if you just asked the question. The reality that I want us to walk away with this morning. If you don't hear anything else this morning, I want you to hear this. God calls us to do what we know how to do and trust that he will do what only he can do. God calls us to do what we know how to do and trust that he will do what only he can do. Let's look at Matthew chapter 14 this morning together. We're going to look at a couple very familiar passages this morning that really illustrate what we're talking about perfectly. And if you've spent any time in church, you kind of know these passages, you know these stories. It's going to be familiar to you. But setting the context, Matthew 14, it starts with this encounter that John the Baptist has with Herod, and it basically ends up with John the Baptist, who was a prophet who went before Jesus to kind of prepare people for Jesus to step on the scene. John the Baptist ends up being killed. And so Jesus, as we get right into this, is responding to the news that he's heard that John the Baptist has been killed. And so let's read this together. Let's just break this up in chunks. Let's start in verse 13. It says this: When Jesus heard about it, referencing John the Baptist's death, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. And when the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns. As he stepped ashore, he saw a huge crowd, and he felt compassion for them, and he healed their sick. This is kind of a normal thing for Jesus. He would be going about doing kind of his thing, and crowds of people would just be following him no matter where he went. Because at some level, I think they were looking to see what Jesus would do. Some of them were seeking him to heal them or help them in some way. And so Jesus sees these people. He has compassion on them, even though I read this as Jesus is wanting to get away a little bit and kind of mourn the loss of John the Baptist, but he sees the need of the people in front of him, and he has compassion, and so he heals them, and he is there with them. He sees the need, and he begins to fill it. Let's continue on here, verse 15. When evening came, the disciples approached him and said, "This place is a wilderness, and it's already late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." "They don't need to go away," Jesus told them. "You give them something to eat." The disciples are looking around. There's this huge crowd of people. I'm just gonna spoil it here for you. There's like 5,000 men recorded here, and we can estimate that there's probably at least 10,000 or more people, gathered around Jesus watching him. And so the disciples are looking at this, and they're looking at their watches going, "It's getting late. We don't have any food for them. Just Jesus, go tell them you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here," type of thing. But Jesus looks at them, and Jesus doesn't agree with just pushing these people away and sending them away. He rather puts it back on the disciples and says, you do something about this. You do something about this need. And this is really where God works in our lives, I believe. We see a need around us. We see an opportunity to serve. We hear of a hole or a position or something that needs filled. And what do? What's kind of the normal thing for good Christians to do in this? We hear about it, and we go, "I will pray that somebody fills the hole." Right? You laugh because it's a coping mechanism. It's true. I will pray that somebody will fill the hole, and then we walk off feeling good that we did the good Christian thing, right? But I'm going to suggest to you that this morning, in moments like these, when we see needs, when we feel like God is pushing us or nudging us or urging us towards something, that God is actually nudging or urging us towards those needs. That God is pushing us towards those needs. That God's sitting there saying, you do something about this. What are you going to do about this need? I want you to get involved. But we're quick to deny that we are going to get involved or that we are able to do anything about this, aren't we? We're quick to deny that we are equipped in order to fill this need. And the disciples find themselves in the same place. Look at verse 17. The disciples say, but we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish here. To look at Jesus and go, look at the 10,000 people, at least, it's recorded 5,000 men. Look at the thousands of people that we have here. And we just have this one little paper sack worth of lunch that's got a few fish and a few pieces of bread. We don't have enough to give. We're not equipped to provide a meal for all of these people here today. The disciples look at their little bit of food that they have, and then they look at this massive, intimidating, overwhelming crowd size and say, it's just not going to work out. This is all we have to give, and it is not enough. And funny thing is, you and I do this too. We do this as well. We hear about the needs that are out there. We maybe even feel God pushing us towards filling a hole or a service or an opportunity, but we look at the situation, we look at what the need would require, and then we look at ourselves and we think there's no possible way, right? There's no way I can do this. I am not equipped to do this. I'm not able to do this. I haven't interacted with junior high and high school students for years. I wouldn't even know how to have a conversation with them, or I don't know the first thing about operating this or leading this. I don't know the first thing about being on a security team. I can't carry a tune in a bucket. I can't, and we can fill in the blank there. We can look at our capacity, we can look at who we are, and we can think, I'm not qualified. I'm not able to fill this need. And so we say things like, I don't have time to do this. Or I'm scared, I'm fearful to do this, or I don't know how to do this, or I don't have the answers to the questions, or I don't have enough experience in this. We can go on and make a longer list. And we look at whatever God is nudging us towards, and we convince ourselves that we don't qualify because we feel ultimately ill-equipped. And we say, this is all I have to give. This is all I think I have to give. This is all that in my mind I'm able to do, and we believe that it's not enough to give, and so we just do nothing. And we find the disciples in the same place. We find the disciples here saying, we don't have enough. I don't have enough to give to this situation. But look at verse 18. After they say, this is all the food that we have this little bit of fish and this little bit of bread, Jesus says, bring them here to me. I think this is such an important verse. Bring what you have here to me. Jesus is saying, give me whatever you have. You have a little bit of food, you have a little bit of bread and fish, bring it to me. Jesus is saying, bring me what you know. Bring me the time that you do have to offer. Bring me the fear that you may have. Bring me what little experience you may have. Bring me the answers that you have. Bring it to me. And let me handle the rest. Verse 19. Then Jesus commanded the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed it. He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. Jesus, I almost imagine, this in my mind, this picture of this hillside covered with, 10,000 plus people. And Jesus gets his little group of disciples together, his 12 guys, and he says, okay, we've got this fish, we've got these pieces of bread, and he says, come here, let me show you how this works. And he takes the food and he blesses it, and then he gives a little bit to each of the disciples. And he says, here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm not asking you to perform a miracle. He looks at his disciples and says, I'm asking you to go out and hand this out. I'm asking you to go out and to serve this to the people. And so the disciples turn and they walk through the crowd and they give the food away. They serve the people because that's what they knew how to do. They did what they knew how to do, and they had in that moment, trust that Jesus would do what only he could do. So when we get this internal nudging in our lives, when we feel God pushing us towards something or to join something or to start something or to help somewhere, we need to step out and we need to do what we know how to do and trust that God will do what only he can do. Because here's what's at stake. Here's what's at stake for us. It's not about filling holes. It's not about making sure the infrastructure is sound. It's not about making sure ministries do or don't fail. That's not the point here. What's at stake here, honestly, is the size and the capacity of your faith. What's at stake here is the intimacy of the relationship that you have with God. And yes, there's benefits to this, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but God desires to stretch and to grow our faith in him, and he does that by nudging us, by pushing us, and by challenging us, step out, fill this hole, do this thing. He challenges us to go out and to do what we know how to do and trust that he will do what only he can do. An effect of this is that God does amazing things. God takes ordinary people that just go out and are faithful to do what they know how to do, and he takes that and he does amazing things with that. Big things happen. I want to tell you about two this morning. I want to tell you about Pioneer Bible Translators. Pioneer Bible Translators began back in the 1970s when really one man and just a couple others, Al Hamilton and a few others, simply had a passion to translate God's word into languages that didn't have God's word translated into them. And so what he did was he trusted that God was going to do what only he can do, and this man just stepped out and said, here's what I know how to do, and he began organizing and he began mobilizing others to begin the process of translating the Bible into languages that didn't have it. And some of these languages, they actually had to go in and first establish a written language for the people group before they could even start translating the Bible into that language. And they began this work. And over the last several decades, it has just continued to grow and grow and grow. And now some 40 years later, Pioneer Bible Translators are serving 38 million people in 73 language projects in 17 countries, and desiring to expand with an additional 11 new projects by the end of 2018. And I got the opportunity in college to learn from two men who worked with Pioneer Bible Translators in Papua New Guinea, and they actually just a couple years ago celebrated the New Testament being translated into the Papua New Guinea language for the very first time, and they threw a party, and it was awesome. So you can look them up online. They are celebrating accomplishments on a regular basis now because a few men stepped out and did what they knew how to do and trusted that God was going to do what only he could do. I want to tell you about another one. Rafa House. Rafa House began in Cambodia just a couple decades ago. Cambodian girls had been disappearing from their villages, never really to be seen again. And what people began to learn is that they were being kidnapped and then put into the sex trafficking industry, really never to be seen again. And a man by the name of Joe Garman saw this firsthand, and his heart broke for the thousands of women and children that were being affected by this directly. And so he came back to the United States. He gathered a few people around him, and again, he just did what he knew how to do. He was an organizer, he was an encourager, and he rallied support, and he rallied experts to combat this issue. In 2003, Rafa House set its first safe home in Cambodia where they not only work to bring women and children out of the sex industry, but also put them in a home where it helps them learn and get back to a place to where they can go back out into regular life whole and well again. And now Rapha House is an international organization that works to raise awareness on the sex trafficking issue, providing healing and help for those who are rescued, and provides survivors help for their return back into normal life. And they are helping thousands and thousands of women and children get out of the sex industry and back into normal life. And this could only happen because a few people just stepped out and did what they knew how to do and trusted that God was going to do some pretty amazing things with that. Let's continue on. Let's look at verse 20. It says this: after they passed out the food, everyone ate and was filled. Then they picked up 12 baskets full of leftover pieces. Now, those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And here's the reality of what we see here. The disciples did not look at what happened after they got done handing out food and then they collected the leftovers. They did not look at that and go, oh, hey, look what we were able to do. Look what we accomplished with this little sack lunch that we got here. They didn't take credit for this. They didn't stand up and say, look what we did. This was Jesus doing really what only he could do. And all Jesus really asked is that the disciples would go out and they would do what they could do, which was to serve the people. And we see a transition take place here in Matthew. We go from Jesus doing this great miracle of feeding 5,000 people, and we see a transition taking place to another instance immediately following this. And what I think is happening here is this isn't just random occurrence of Jesus just saying, oh, look at this miracle I can do, and look at this thing I can do. I think Jesus is being very intentional with his disciples about teaching them about faith in him. And I don't want us to miss this morning. I don't think this is by accident. Jesus teaching them about trust and faith in him. And so if we can imagine the feeding of the 5,000 was the 101 level class, what we're going to see and read about here is the 201 level class. And so let's continue on, verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already over a mile from land, battered by the wind, because the wind was against them. And so Jesus, sends the disciples, get into a boat, start heading towards the other side. I'll catch up with you later. Jesus dismisses the crowd after they have been fed to the full. And then Jesus wants to get away for a little bit, and he spends a little bit of time by himself. And in the course of this, hours pass. It's now nighttime. The wind starts picking up on the lake where the disciples are, and so Jesus starts going back towards them while the disciples are on this boat dealing with this storm that is beating up the boat. Let's continue on, verse 25. Around 3 a.m, Jesus came towards them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. So I just want to step back here for a moment and acknowledge the fact that these guys are human for a minute. Because I think the temptation that I fall into, and maybe you fall into this as well, is we read about guys in the Bible, we look at people in the Bible, and we almost put them up on these pedestals like they're perfect people that don't have any problems, that don't have any struggles. And what we see here is a very different picture. These guys don't look great here, in my opinion. These guys, they're not earning their place on the pedestal because what they just saw a few hours ago was Jesus take a sack lunch and turn it into a full catered meal for like 10,000 people. Okay? So you'd be looking at that and going, I would like to think that I would look at that and go, oh my goodness, this is really the Son of God here. And then just a few hours later, though, what we see is these guys are sitting here in the midst of a storm, and they see this man walking towards them, and they're not going, hey, look, Jesus is finally coming to rescue us. He's finally coming to be with us. They say, it's a ghost. we see them in a moment of being human, really, in a moment really of being a little cowardly, in my opinion. In the midst of the storm, in the midst of the struggle of that, we see these guys look like cowards. They sure don't look like they have a lot of faith right now. They sure don't look like they're really trusting Jesus right now. And so they think that they see a ghost or a man or something walking towards them. Let's continue on, verse 27. Immediately, Jesus spoke to them, "Have courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter answered him, "command me to come to you on the water." We give Peter a lot of grief, I think. If we're going to talk down on any one of the disciples, I think we're going to talk down on Peter. And rightly so, he didn't do himself any favors, at least what we read in the New Testament a lot of times. He's the one that got arrogant quite a bit. He is the one that denied Jesus after they arrested Jesus. He is that one. And so we talk down on him quite a bit. But I want to look at this, and I want to say, maybe out of all 12 disciples, Peter is the one who had faith in this moment. Peter is the one who had trust in this moment. In the midst of this story unfolding, and in the midst of everybody being afraid around this, Peter, I think, had an insight. I think he understood something about this moment. Here's what Peter didn't do, though. And I think this is important. Peter didn't just say, "I'm just going to jump out into the water and see if I can walk on it." He didn't say, "I'm just going to step out and see if Jesus saves me." He didn't do that. That would be foolish and stupid. But Peter's insight here is if Jesus invites me, if Jesus commands me to step out, if Jesus urges me or pushes me to step out and walk on the water, then I know it'll be true and it'll be real. The principle here is this: if Jesus asks me first, then I step out and I do what I know how to do. If Jesus asks me first, then I step out and do what I know how to do. Look at verse 29. Jesus said, "Come." And climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on water and came towards Jesus. This is really no different than what happened before. This is really no different than what we saw earlier in the day. Jesus says, "Give me what you have, give me what you're able to do, and then trust that I'm going to do what only I can do. Bring me what you're able to do, give me what you're able to do, and then trust that I'm going to do what only I can do." In this moment, Jesus didn't ask Peter to have the power to walk on water. In this moment, Jesus didn't say, "Perform a miracle here and walk out and walk on water." Jesus didn't expect Peter to be able to do miracles. He simply expected Peter to step out of a boat and to walk. And it just so happens to be in the middle of a lake. Peter knew and did what he could do. He trusted that Jesus could do what only he could do. And this should be the Christian experience for us. This should be our life. Ultimately, what Peter is saying here is he's praying, "Jesus, invite me out of my comfort zone. Invite me to step out in ways in which I'll be stretched, in ways that I'll be challenged." And if you and I are brave, we would pray the same prayer. "Lord, invite me outside of my comfort zone. Invite me outside of my comfort zone." I think for most of us, God is probably already, and maybe for some time now, has been pushing us or nudging us or convicting us, or however you want to say it, towards something. I think most of us, if you're following Jesus, God is already inviting us towards something, and maybe we've been just kind of pushing it to the back of our mind or ignoring it, or maybe we're coming up with the excuses of "I can't," or I'm not qualified, or "I'm not able," for whatever reason. I challenge you to be brave and courageous this morning and pray that prayer. "Jesus, Lord, invite me out of my comfort zone." Look at verse 30 and 31. "But when he," meaning Peter, "saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' And immediately Jesus reached out his hand, caught hold of him, and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" I don't think that Jesus in this moment, we look at this and I think it's easy for us to go, well, Jesus is kind of disciplining or chastising Peter here a little bit. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think Jesus is trying to encourage Peter here. Think about what would have happened if you had more faith. You would be standing on water with me. But here, Peter, in this moment, he stopped looking at Jesus, and he started looking at his own ability. In this moment, when Peter starts to sink, he stopped keeping his eyes on Jesus and just doing what he knows how to do, and he started looking around him at how incapable he was. And that's where it goes wrong for us, I think. We stop looking at Jesus. We stop just saying, okay, if you call me, I will follow you. We stop saying that, and we stop keeping our eyes on Jesus, and we start looking at ourselves, and we start saying, look at all the ways that I'm not able to do this. Look at all the ways that I am incapable to do this. Look at all the ways that prove that I cannot do this. Jesus is not asking us to be able to do everything. He's not asking us to be able to perform miracles. He's simply asking us to do what we know how to do and trust him to do what only he can do. Let's finish this up, verse 32 and 33. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those in the boat worshiped him and said, "Truly you are the Son of God." And I chuckle here a little bit when I read this because I just think about the progression that is taking place, right? Just a few hours ago, they saw Jesus take a lunch sack and turn it into a meal for 10,000 people. And it's almost like they're in their minds, the disciples are thinking, wow, this guy is pretty good. I wonder if he's like, maybe he's the Son of God. And then we see this encounter with Jesus walking on the water and this whole thing with Peter stepping out. And almost in their minds, they're saying, we suspected this, but now we are for sure you are the Son of God, and they worship him. Now we believe for sure that you are the Son of God. Now, let's go back. 10 or 12 years now after foolishly, in some cases, agreeing to spend 2 hours or so every Wednesday with 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys. After teaching those elementary boys, many of them have grown up. They've graduated high school, graduated college, many of them, and some of them have even gotten married and are having kids right now, and it makes me feel super old. The reality here, there's two realities, okay, so don't quit listening to me right at the beginning. The first reality is this: I'm no fool here. I know because I've asked the question, some of these boys do not even remember me and know that I exist. And so at some level, I know that I probably, for many of them, did not alter the course of their life because I spent 2 hours a week with them on Wednesdays, struggling and arguing and sometimes getting mad at them and all of that. I realize I'm no fool that for many of them, I did not alter the course of their life because I spent 2 hours. It's not like we were sitting down for 2 hours with 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys sitting around in a circle having deep theological conversations about the mysteries of God, okay? We were talking about what 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys talk about, which we're not going to go there. But the other side of this is also true. I am no fool in this regard as well. For a few months, a couple hours a week, I got to point some boys to Jesus. I got to spend some time with some very difficult, very annoying, very smelly, very argumentative boys for a couple hours a week, pointing them to Jesus. And I am no fool. If nothing else happened, that changed me. I am better because of it. I am different because of it. And even though I will never, ever again in my life spend time with 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys for any length of time, I grew, and I learned from that experience. And I will never regret that time that I got to spend with him. And for some of you, someone in your life made an impact on your life. And the reason they made an impact is because God at some point challenged them or nudged them to step out, probably outside of their comfort zone. And because they were faithful, because they trusted God to do what only He can do, they stepped out of their comfort zone and they interacted with you. And some of you are here today following Jesus because somebody was faithful and stepped out. Don't you want that for somebody else? Don't you want that for somebody else? Don't you possibly even want to be that for somebody else? Aren't you glad that they did that for you, and wouldn't you want that experience for somebody else? Church, where's God nudging you? Where's God urging you towards? Believe me, this isn't a pitch to get holes that we have filled. This isn't a pitch to try and build up our structure a little bit more. This isn't that. First and foremost, and most importantly, I want you to grow in your faith and trust in God. I want you to have a deeper, more intimate relationship with God. And that happens when God urges us or nudges us towards something and we realize we are incapable, but we trust that God is going to do what only He can do, and we step out in that. Now, there is another side to this. There is effect that does take place from this, and that is holes do get filled, and that is people do get served, and people do get pointed towards God, and the kingdom does grow. And these are things that honestly is just icing on the cake for us, because we get to do just a little bit to further God's kingdom around us. Remember this. God knows you personally, and He desires to have an intimate relationship with you, and He calls you by name to step outside of your comfort zone and to grow closer to Him because of your faith. Will you be willing to do what you know how to do and trust that God will do what only He can do in the lives of countless people around you? And so this morning, if that is you, I'm going to invite the singers and the musicians back up. If that's you this morning and you just want to say, okay, I'm going to step out and I'm going to trust that God is going to do what only He can do, and I'm just going to give and I'm going to offer what I'm able to. If that's you this morning, myself, the shepherds will be out in the foyer for the rest of the time this morning. We just invite you, come talk to us. If you're being nudged in a specific direction, we want to help get you in that place. If you're saying, I feel like God's calling me just to do something, but I don't know what, we want to talk to you about what that looks like and maybe help you find a place that would fit you. And so we want to invite you to that. As well, over the next several moments, we just want to give you an opportunity to respond to whatever God is doing in your life. And so this morning, if you're here and today is the day you just want to step out in faith and say, I want to commit my life to following Jesus, we want to celebrate that with you this morning. Will you join us out there? We would love to talk to you about that, and we would love to celebrate that with you this morning. Or if you're here and you just want somebody to talk to or somebody to pray with about what's going on in your life, we invite you out there as well. We would be honored in order to do that with you for just a few moments out there as well. Will you stand with me? We're going to spend some more time worshiping this morning and taking communion, but will you pray with me? Father, I'm thankful for your word, and thank you for this little chapter in Matthew that shows us so much about faith and trust. And Father, I pray for every single one of us, and myself included, that we would be keeping our eyes on you, and we would be listening to your Spirit that nudges and urges and convicts and sometimes just pushes us towards things. And Father, help us have the strength and the courage and the wisdom to step out and to do that, knowing that we are not able to bring everything that is needed, but we can bring what we do have, and we can trust that you are going to do what only you can do. Father, give us strength and courage to be bold, to live boldly. We thank you for your love. We thank you that you know us by name and you call us to this. It's in your Son Jesus' name. Amen.